as we're closing the seventh Mishnah in the first chapter of Sotah, we don't have any doubt anymore about the view which the sages of the Mishnah have of this tragic woman, this woman who's coming before them to be tested. In the words of the Torah, this is a value-free test. She might be innocent, she might be guilty. But it's clear from the words of the Mishnah that the rabbis already consider her to be guilty. And they say in the seventh Mishnah, B'midah she'adam moded ba modedin lo, in the measure with which a person measures, they measure him. She adorned herself for a sin. He made her repulsive. She exposed herself for a skin. He exposed her. The degradation and the humiliation of this ceremony is a payoff, as the Mishnah sees it, is a payoff for what she's done. And the Mishnah then continues with other examples of people who are judged effectively according to their deserts. And really interesting that the Mishnah is going to bring us examples of Shimshon and Avshalom, Samson and Absalom. Both of them, by the way, Nazirim. They were both Nazirs. And we've talked before about the connection between the tractate of Sotah and the tractate of Nazir. They're next to one another in the Mishnah. They're next to one another. The verses that describe them are next to one another in the Torah. There's a common theme of sexual control related to abstinence from wine. And, well, let's just pick up in the eighth Mishnah of the first chapter, and we'll see how the Mishnah brings this together and how the Mishnah brings out these themes. Shimshon halach acharei nav. Samson went after his eyes. He married this beautiful Philistine woman because she was pretty, but she, of course, eventually was responsible for cutting his hair and for him losing his strength. Shimshon halach acharei nav. Samson went after his eyes. Lefichach nikru plishtim et einav. Therefore, the Philistines put out his eyes. His eyes were at fault, and his eyes were his punishment. Avshalom nitnava bi sa'aro. Avshalom was proud of his hair. He sort of glorified in his hair. He loved his hair. Lefichach nitla bisaro. Therefore, he was hanged by his hair. Avshalom, by the way, rebels against his father David. Avshalom is the prince. David is the king. He rebels against David. He assembles this crew of people to crown him king when his father's getting on, and eventually he's chased by his soldiers, and he's caught running away through the forest. He's caught actually in his hair, hanging from a tree. That's how his father's soldiers, Yoav's the general, that's how his father's soldiers find him. And they don't dare kill him, by the way. They know you can't kill the son of the king. And they go back and tell Yoav they found him. And Yoav tells them, no, you have to kill him. He's rebelled against the king. You have to kill him. And so we'll pick up the story. And we'll see again that these themes of giving in to sexual desire, as well as the theme of Nazir. Avshalom was a Nazir. That's why his hair was so long, right? That's why he was trapped in this tree. And is being a Nazir a good or a bad thing? Well, we'll see. We're seeing in this case clearly it's not, because if his hair hadn't been so long, he wouldn't have been trapped. But let's carry the story. Because he had relationships, he had sex with 10 of his father's concubines. So he's clearly anticipating the crown here. He had sex with 10 of his father's concubines. Therefore, they shoved 10 spears into him. So again, measure for measure. And, sort of maybe the spear, maybe there are sexual analogies with a spear. Yeah, he had sex with 10 of his father's concubines. 10 spears were, 10 spears were shoved into him. And now we're going to prove from a pasuk. We'll see the pasuk actually the verse doesn't mention the 10 spears, but it mentions 10 armor bearers. Vayasobu asara narim nosei chle Yoav. Vayaku et Avshalom vayamituhu, and 10 of Yoav's young arms bearers surrounded him. And then the verse goes on to say, and they struck him and he died. So the verse doesn't actually make clear that they shoved him with spears. That's the assumption of the Mishnah. That's the poetry of the Mishnah. And because he stole 3 thefts, he stole 3 things away. Ulefi sheganav shlosha gnevot, leiv aviv veleiv beidin veleiv anshe Yisrael. He stole these 3 things: the heart of his father, the heart of the court, and the heart of Israel. So again, we've got this emotional theft going on here. That we've got the link between sex and emotions, and it somehow everything's going wrong, and he's punished measure for measure for these 3 thefts. How is he punished? Nit geuvo shlosha shvatim, 3 darts were driven into him. So now we got 3 rather than 10, by the way. 3 spears were shoved into him. Nit keuvo shlosha shvatim. A shevet can be a staff, a spear, as well as a tribe. Shene'emar vayikach shlosha shvatim b'chapo vayitkaim b'lev Avshalom. And he took 3 spears in his hand and he drove them through the heart of Avshalom. So he stole the hearts of his people and of his father and of the court, and his heart was pierced by these 3 spears. So we do judge on measure for measure, particularly in matters of the heart. That's the message of the 8th Mishnah. And the chapter will now close on a positive note. We cannot close the chapter on this sort of on these sorts of ideas. And so we're going to say inyan hatova, and the same is true for good. The chapter will close on the good, not on the bad. Miriam himtina Moshe sha'achat. Miriam, Moses' big sister, Moshe's big sister, waited for him, 1 hour, according to the Mishnah. Actually, the text doesn't say for how long. Shenemar v'tetat seva choto merachok l'dea ma ye'aseh lo. His sister stood far off to see what would happen to him. His sister has put him into the basket in the Nile. He's going to be picked up by the daughter of Pharaoh, but his sister doesn't leave him. She's standing by, waiting actually to speak to the daughter of Pharaoh after he's picked up. And therefore, she has the merit that the whole camp waits for her. And therefore, the whole of the people of Israel waited for her 7 days in the desert. Where are we here? We're still in the book of Bamidbar. We're not very many chapters away from the story of the Nazir and the story of the Sotah. We're still possibly in areas to do with emotion and sex. The statement in the Torah is that Miriam spoke about her brother, about Moshe, and about the Cushite woman he'd married. So there's slander going on. There's some chat going on here, but it's related to a sexual relationship between Moshe and this Cushite woman he married, and she's punished. She's turned into a leper for 7 days, but the people wait for her. The camp doesn't move on, so she goes outside the camp for 7 days, and the people wait for her. Shenemar ve'am lo nasa ad heasef Miriam. And the people didn't journey until Miriam was brought in again. Ad heasef, the root aleph, sin, pei. We're going to see this root until she was gathered in again. The people wait for Miriam. Now, Miriam is not the only example of someone who's judged for good. And by the way, of someone where there's something of a kind of sexual innuendo or overtone. Yosef Zachalik Boret Aviv. Joseph had the merit of burying his father. Remember, Joseph is the one who resisted the temptation of the wife of Potiphar. He resists this temptation. He's actually sent down to prison anyway, but he does resist the temptation to be seduced by Potiphar's wife. So he is tempted and he does withstand. And he has the merit of burying the bones of his father Jacob. Yosef Zachalik Boret Aviv. Joseph had the merit of burying his father. And nobody among his brothers was greater than him. Somehow this merit seemed to have led to his either the merit led to I think the merit of burying his father led to his enhanced status among his brothers. And we read, and now here's a pasuk, here's a verse from Genesis, Vayal Yosef li Boret Aviv. Joseph went up to bury his father. And we know how great he was because there went up with him many chariots and many horsemen, and there was a great camp. Very, very great camp. But how do we know exactly? How do we know exactly that Joseph was greater than all the other brothers? Well, we're going to see who buries him. And the Mishnah now asks again, Milanu gadol mi Yosef. Who do we have that's greater than Joseph? By the way, Kaufman has Moshe here. This is clearly a typo or a scribal error. But all the other Mishnah manuscripts say, who is it that's greater than Joseph? Shiloni tasek bo ele Moshe. Who is it that's greater than Joseph? Because none other than Moses dealt with his burial. Moses had the merit of burying the bones of Joseph. And of course, there was no one greater in Israel than him. And how do we know that Moses buried Joseph's bones? Because we have at the beginning of Shmot, Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. When they went out of Egypt, Moses took the bones of Joseph. And how do we know, of course, that this is the greatest possible person, that Joseph is buried by the greatest possible person in Israel? Well, we're going to prove this by Moses' burial. Umi lanu gadol mi Moshe. Whom do we have greater than Moshe? You can see, by the way, here the scribal error, the source of the scribal error of Yosef for Moshe in the previous saying. Umi lanu gadol mi Moshe. Who's greater than Moshe? Shelo nitasek bo ele hamakom baruch hu. Well, this is the final verse, if you like, in this halachic poetry. Who is greater than Moshe? Well, no one can be greater than Moshe because none other than God himself occupied himself with the burial. Because it said, and he buried him in the valley. At the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of Sefer Devarim, it's recorded that God himself buried Moshe. So we know that Moshe is the greatest prophet because God buried him. Joseph is the greatest of the brothers because Moshe buried him. And that's how we prove it. That's how we prove it. Velo al Moshe bilvad amru, but this doesn't apply just to Moshe. Everybody, all of us, can possibly have this type of merit. Velo al Moshe bilvad amru. This is not just said about Moshe. Ela b'chol hatzadikim. But the same is said about every single righteous person, every single tzaddik. Shenemar will prove this from a verse, this time from Isaiah. V'halach lefanecha tzikecha. Your righteousness shall go before you. Kavod Adonai ya'asfecha. The honor of God shall gather you up. Ya'asfecha shall gather you in. This is the same verb used for Miriam. Remember, we learned the people didn't travel ad ha'asef Miriam. The people didn't travel until Miriam was brought in. And with regard to these tzaddikim, these righteous people, kavod Hashem ya'asfecha, the presence of the honor of God shall gather you up. And this verb, this verb he'asef, aleph samech pei, is very often a euphemism for death. You know, we read that someone is gathered into his fathers as a euphemism for the fact that he's passed on, he's passed away. And here we're closing the first chapter of the Mishnah with a statement that we've learned about the Sotah, and the Mishnah has told us what it thinks about the Sotah, which is it already, even before the test has been completed, it believes that the Sotah is guilty. But it's extending out to us the promise that tzaddikim, that righteous people, are going to be gathered up in their death by none other than God himself. Your righteousness shall go before you. Kavod Adonai yasfecha. The presence of the Lord shall gather you in.